Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. Without Winston Churchill, would Britain have survived World War II? It's a question that still stirs debate today, and it speaks to the towering role Churchill played during one of history's darkest chapters. Known for his unshakable determination and stirring speeches, Churchill is often remembered as the man who stood firm when the rest of Europe was collapsing under Nazi domination. His reputation as a wartime leader is legendary, symbolizing British resistance, resilience, and resolve. But Churchill was more than just a voice on the radio. He was a complex figure, a political strategist, a military planner, and a leader who made tough moral decisions under unimaginable pressure. In this video, we'll explore how Churchill's leadership, political, military, and moral, helped shape the course of World War II and defined Britain's role in the fight against tyranny. Before he became Britain's wartime leader, Winston Churchill had already lived a life full of political triumphs and failures. He began his career as a soldier and war correspondent, gaining fame for his daring exploits in places like Cuba, India, and South Africa. Entering Parliament in 1900, Churchill held various key positions, including First Lord of the Admiralty during World War I, where he helped modernize the Navy. However, his involvement in the disastrous Gallipoli campaign led to his temporary fall from political grace. Throughout the 1920s and early 1930s, Churchill remained active but controversial. He switched parties more than once, opposed Indian self-rule, and often clashed with his colleagues. But while many dismissed him as out of touch, Churchill was one of the few politicians who consistently warned about the growing threat of Nazi Germany. While others favored appeasement, Churchill called for British rearmament and greater vigilance. He spoke out forcefully about Hitler's rise, Germany's military buildup, and the danger of ignoring the warning signs. Despite these warnings, Churchill spent much of the 1930s in the political wilderness. Labeled a warmonger by some and a relic of the past by others, he was largely sidelined from power and influence. Yet as the world edged closer to war, the qualities that once made Churchill a divisive figure, his stubbornness, his foresight, his refusal to compromise with tyranny, would soon make him indispensable. By May 1940, Britain was on the brink of disaster. Nazi Germany had swept through much of Europe with shocking speed. Norway had fallen, and now France and the Low Countries were under fierce attack. Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, whose policy of appeasement had failed to contain Hitler, lost the confidence of Parliament and the public. With pressure mounting and war escalating, Chamberlain resigned. On May 10, 1940, the very day Hitler launched his invasion of France and the Low Countries, Winston Churchill was appointed Prime Minister. It was Britain's darkest hour. The British Army was trapped at Dunkirk, Nazi forces were blitzing their way across Europe, and fears of a German invasion of Britain felt very real. Churchill stepped into leadership at a time of chaos and uncertainty. The nation was demoralized, the government was divided, and the outcome of the war was far from certain. Yet Churchill immediately began to unify the country, forming a coalition government and preparing Britain to stand alone against Hitler's war machine. His first major test would come within weeks, as the British prepared for what seemed like inevitable defeat on the beaches of France. In Britain's darkest hour, when invasion seemed imminent and the rest of Europe had crumbled, Winston Churchill's leadership became a symbol of hope and defiance. His speeches, delivered with powerful emotion and unwavering resolve, were not just words, they were weapons of morale. In June 1940, after the evacuation at Dunkirk, Churchill delivered one of his most famous addresses to Parliament. "We shall fight on the beaches." In it, he promised that Britain would never surrender, no matter the cost, rallying the nation with sheer force of will. A few weeks later, with France fallen and Britain standing alone, he spoke of their finest hour, warning that the battle of Britain was about to begin, and that the outcome would determine the survival of Western civilization. These speeches echoed across the country, on radios in homes and bunkers, and helped stiffen the resolve of ordinary citizens facing the terror of war. Churchill's leadership wasn't just rhetorical, it was strategic and hands-on. During the WWII Blitz, when German bombers rained destruction on London and other cities night after night, Churchill visited bombed-out neighborhoods, walked among the rubble, and met with citizens and firefighters. His presence sent a clear message. The government would not hide, and neither would he. One of his earliest and most crucial decisions was overseeing Operation Dynamo, the daring evacuation of over 330,000 Allied soldiers from the beaches of Dunkirk, in late May and early June 1940. Facing encirclement by German forces, the British military, along with hundreds of civilian boats, rescued the trapped troops against overwhelming odds. Churchill famously called it a miracle of deliverance, but he also reminded the nation that wars are not won by evacuations. He knew the hardest days were still to come, and he prepared the country to face them head-on. In these desperate moments, Churchill's unique blend of determination, eloquence, and visibility gave the British people something priceless: the belief that they could endure, and eventually, triumph. Winston Churchill was not a passive wartime leader. He was deeply involved in military planning and strategy, sometimes to a fault. As Prime Minister and also Minister of Defense, he took a hands-on approach, attending military briefings, questioning commanders, and pushing for bold, often risky operations. His energy and determination drove the war effort forward, but his intense involvement sometimes caused friction with Britain's top generals. One of Churchill's key strategies was the support of strategic bombing. He believed that heavy bombing of German industrial centers and cities would weaken the enemy's ability to wage war and demoralize its population. While controversial, the bombing campaigns, particularly those led by the RAF against cities like Hamburg and Dresden, became a central part of Britain's offensive strategy, especially before the Allies could launch a full-scale invasion of Europe. Churchill's relationship with military leadership was complex. He often clashed with generals who preferred cautious, methodical approaches, while he pushed for action and innovation. His boldness inspired many, but it also led to setbacks. One such failure was the Dieppe raid in 1942, a disastrous attempt to capture a French port with largely Canadian forces. Poor planning and underestimated German defenses led to heavy casualties and little gain. It was a sobering reminder of the risks of Churchill's aggressive instincts. These WWII setbacks echoed his earlier failure in World War I, when he championed the Gallipoli campaign, a disastrous naval assault on the Ottoman Empire that ended in defeat and massive loss of life. That failure haunted Churchill for decades and served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of overreach. Despite these missteps, Churchill learned from experience and remained adaptable. He ultimately supported the slower, more deliberate buildup to D-Day in 1944, recognizing the need for overwhelming force and coordination with the Americans. While not every military decision under his leadership was a success, Churchill's vision, persistence, and willingness to take calculated risks were crucial in keeping Britain on the offensive and in the fight. Winston Churchill's role as a wartime leader went far beyond the battlefield. He was also a master diplomat, helping to shape the Grand Alliance that would ultimately defeat Nazi Germany. His relationships with Franklin D. Roosevelt and Joseph Stalin, though complicated, were central to the success of the Allied powers. Churchill's bond with Roosevelt was built on shared values, personal charm, and relentless communication. Even before the U.S. entered the war, Churchill worked tirelessly to secure American support, famously saying, "Give us the tools, and we will finish the job." Their correspondence included hundreds of letters, telegrams, and secret meetings. In 1941, Churchill and Roosevelt met in Newfoundland to draft the Atlantic Charter, a visionary statement of war aims and post-war ideals, including self-determination, free trade, and a commitment to lasting peace. This agreement laid the moral and political groundwork for what would later become the United Nations. Churchill's relationship with Stalin, however, was far more strained. Deep ideological differences and mutual suspicion made cooperation difficult, but Churchill understood the necessity of keeping the Soviet Union in the fight. The brutal Eastern Front tied down the bulk of Hitler's forces, making Stalin's continued engagement crucial. Though wary of Stalin's ambitions, Churchill was willing to negotiate, often walking a tightrope between firm resistance and pragmatic compromise. These three leaders, Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin, met in person at several major wartime conferences. At the Tehran Conference in 1943, they discussed opening a second front in Western Europe, which would eventually become D-Day. At the Yalta Conference in early 1945, they made critical decisions about post-war Europe, including the division of Germany and plans for the United Nations, though tensions over Soviet control in Eastern Europe were already surfacing. By the Potsdam Conference later that year, Churchill had been replaced mid-conference by Clement Attlee following Britain's general election. But the alliances and decisions Churchill helped forge continued to shape the post-war world. Churchill's diplomatic efforts helped hold together a fragile but powerful alliance. Through skillful negotiation, personal charm, and a deep understanding of both realpolitik and idealism, he ensured that Britain remained a key player on the global stage and helped lay the foundation for the new world order that would emerge after the war. As the tide of war turned, Winston Churchill remained at the heart of Allied strategy and British determination. When D-Day finally came on June 6, 1944, Churchill was both relieved and resolute. The long-awaited Allied invasion of Nazi-occupied France marked the beginning of the end for Hitler's regime. Churchill closely followed the operation, speaking with commanders, visiting troops, and praising the bravery of the soldiers who stormed the beaches of Normandy. Though deeply moved, he also understood that hard fighting still lay ahead before total victory could be declared. By May 1945, Germany had surrendered. On May 8, 1945, V-Day, Victory in Europe Day, Churchill stood on a balcony in Whitehall, waving to jubilant crowds below. The war in Europe was over. He gave a short but powerful speech, reminding the British people that while victory was sweet, the cost had been immense. He then walked through the cheering crowds, smiling, smoking his cigar, and silently sharing in the nation's relief and pride. Yet even in triumph, the world was changing. The war had left Britain victorious, but weakened. Its economy was drained, and its empire, once vast and powerful, was beginning to fade. The United States and the Soviet Union emerged as the new global superpowers. Churchill, once at the center of the world's most important alliance, now saw Britain's role begin to diminish. Still, his leadership during the war had secured his place in history. Churchill was not just the voice of defiance during Britain's darkest hour. He was one of the architects of victory and a symbol of resilience in the face of tyranny. Despite leading Britain to victory, Winston Churchill faced an unexpected blow just months after the war ended. He lost the 1945 general election to Clement Attlee's Labour Party. The British public, weary from years of war and hardship, wanted change, better housing, healthcare, and jobs. Churchill was seen as a wartime hero, but many felt he wasn't the man to rebuild a peacetime Britain. Even in defeat, Churchill accepted the result with grace and continued to serve as leader of the opposition. In 1946, he delivered one of his most famous post-war speeches in Fulton, Missouri, the Iron Curtain speech. In it, Churchill warned the world of a new threat, Soviet expansion in Eastern Europe, and the sharp division between the democratic West and the communist East. His speech is often credited with helping to define the early stages of the Cold War, and it showed Churchill's enduring foresight on global affairs. Though no longer at the helm during Britain's Reconstruction, Churchill's influence remained immense. He returned as Prime Minister in 1951, serving until 1955, but it was his legacy as a wartime leader and defender of democratic values that endured. He championed European unity, warned against tyranny in any form, and shaped how the 20th century remembered the fight for freedom. Churchill's impact went far beyond Britain. He became a symbol of resistance, leadership, and perseverance. For much of the free world, he was the voice that never wavered, even when the future looked darkest. His legacy is one of unshakable resolve, stirring oratory, and a profound belief in liberty and democracy, values that continue to shape the modern world. Was Winston Churchill the right man for the right time? History seems to answer with a resounding yes. In Britain's darkest moments, when defeat felt inevitable and hope was fading, Churchill's voice, vision, and unshakable determination rallied a nation and helped turn the tide of World War II. His speeches stirred the soul. His diplomacy forged crucial alliances, and his leadership helped steer the Allies to victory. Yet he was also complex and flawed, sometimes too bold, often stubborn, and not always right. Still, in the crucible of global conflict, it was Churchill's strength of character and refusal to surrender that made all the difference. His legacy lives on not just in Britain but across the modern world, in the institutions he helped shape, the warnings he gave, and the freedoms he defended. What do you think about Churchill's wartime leadership? Was he a hero, a strategist, a symbol, or all three? Let us know in the comments.